Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kelsey Nelson. I'm on the product marketing team at Okta, and today we're going to talk about how you can optimize and secure your supply chain IT with Okta. So just a quick overview of what we're planning to go over today. We'll start with just some quick background on Okta, why we're having this conversation today. We'll touch on some of the challenges that we see across the manufacturing industry, particularly with a focus on the IT issues. And then we'll dig into some of the solutions that we've seen organizations doing today. So things like how can you simplify your IT management and increase security across that supply chain. And then interspersed throughout this, we'll give some examples of organizations that are using Okta to do so today. So to jump right in, for those of you who aren't familiar with Okta, our mission is to enable any organization to use any technology. So we're in the identity and access management space, and it's our mission to be able to connect any combination of people, which can be your employees. Those employees can be based in a corporate headquarters or can be located remotely or in maybe a factory setting. Also contractors, partners, even your customers, that full ecosystem of users who need to access technology. And then of course, all of the services, both cloud and on-prem, that your users will need to access to be productive. And how we think about identity today falls into three core buckets. So again, that first one is the independent neutral platform for your workforce. So as I mentioned, that can look like corporate workers. Those corporate workers and factory workers can be remote, they can be on the road, they can be based in an office location. Contractors and partner collaborators are certainly an extended part of your workforce. And we want to make sure that we enable them regardless of where they are, what device they're using, so that they can be productive. Secondly, we also want to ensure that we have a scalable customer identity platform. So we have a number of companies ranging from JetBlue to MLB to Albertsons who use Okta as their platform for customer-facing experiences. And then lastly, we talk about zero trust. So as organizations are adopting cloud technologies and mobile technologies, the traditional approaches to security are no longer going to be viable for you. And so how can you start to rethink security in this world where the perimeter no longer makes sense? So we see that as an identity-centric approach, again, ensuring that the right people have access to the right resources at the right time, and that's really what zero trust is grounded in. Again, Okta has been leading in the identity industry. We have been a 8 for 8 leader in terms of placements, so leader since 2012, and we do work with a number of manufacturing organizations. Certainly manufacturing can cover the spectrum from more technology to food and beverage to even something like clothing and retail. So certainly cover that, but I think one of the consistencies that we hear from across our manufacturing customers is that complexity around the supply chain, which is why we're focused on that today. And just to ground today's conversation, we wanted to take a look at what's kind of happening across the manufacturing industry. So certainly this probably resonates with many of you who are listening in today, but manufacturers are leading economic growth and innovation, right? They're contributing a massive percentage of US GDP, for example. And there's also a significant number of workers, 12.8 million manufacturing workers, accounting for almost 10% of the workforce. And they have a lot to protect. We saw from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is where these stats came from, that a heavy percent of all private sector research and development is coming from this sector. So essentially what we're seeing today is that the manufacturing industry is facing this global arms race. There was an issue of The Economist this summer that talked about the challenges that are facing the global supply chains. And we see, on the one hand, with the rise of organizations, and I think this quote from The Economist speaks to that, of the Amazons, the Alibabas, and all of these e-commerce giants have changed the perception from consumers on what manufacturing businesses can deliver. And on the other hand, we see that technology has also enabled rapid change to happen across supply chains, right? Supply chains are undergoing the most rapid change in decades in response to these types of trends. But combined with the shifting regulatory requirements and growing international tensions, manufacturers have enormous pressure to modernize and to keep pace with advancing innovations. So while technology can be a massive force for change and helping to compete in this global arms race. We also know that the security piece is evolving pretty rapidly as well, right? Aggressive threat actors appear to have be moving almost as quickly, if not more quickly, than many businesses. So how do we stay ahead of them? And so I think what was very interesting is when I took a look at this survey from KPMG on manufacturing CIOs is that we see that the manufacturing sector has a pretty even split in terms of how they're approaching projects that are related to how they're approaching projects, right? Many industries are pushing more on projects that are making money, right? Are more heavily on those that 2/3 on ones that are making money versus those that are saving money. But for manufacturing organizations, that's pretty evenly split, in part probably because we know that margins are critical in order to compete in this innovative environment. So we need to be able to streamline processes while also finding new ways to innovate and reach consumers. Which is unsurprising then that we're seeing many projects and many initiatives from a technology perspective that are looking to the cloud, right? We know that cloud can help reduce friction, can help minimize margins, can help with a number of these projects, and we see that the intent is to grow across not only software as a service, but infrastructure and platforms over the next few years. But with that does come a number of challenges. Cloud, for example, for IT manufacturers, when it comes to adopting cloud, more than half cite existing architecture integration issues. So for many manufacturing businesses, they have evolved over a period of time, and so they have a lot of existing technology, potentially on premises, but in their data centers, that they need to integrate with these cloud services. Alongside that, again, we go back to some of those projects, or how the CEO mindset is for manufacturers, and we're both looking at saving money as well as driving business innovation. And so there are challenges when adopting these cloud services and making that business case and proving out ROI when compared to other business needs. And then lastly, of course, that security piece is critical, not only from a raw security standpoint, but also the broader legal and regulatory pieces that come along with that. Compliance and the regulatory landscape is continuing to evolve. And what I thought was particularly telling here is that manufacturing businesses are more likely to face challenges around integration with existing architecture than any other industry. And I think seeing the evolution of manufacturing over the years and how they've been constant drivers of innovation in technology and in using technology to optimize the business, that often comes with existing challenges. So how do we start to overcome them? So when we take a look at the keys to securing and optimizing that broad supply chain, we take a look at it from 3 different angles. So one is from a people perspective. So the supply chain has an extremely complex set of users that are going to be required to get access into those various systems that they need in order to deliver a product at the end of the line. So that can be, again, the folks who work potentially in a corporate office or who work on site at one of our factory or distributor locations. That can also be external users such as contractors and partners. And we need to make sure that we limit or secure access for all of those different people at different points along the supply chain. And we need to do so while we reduce manual tasks in enabling that. So things like onboarding and offboarding, which can also be a security concern as well. Second, we wanted to take a look at the technology piece. So we have the people that need access, but we also know that there are technologies that they're going to need to get access to. So how can we ease technology adoption and management, both in terms of the new services that we want to adopt, but also those existing on-prem, because we know that that's a challenge for manufacturers. So how can we enable that hybrid IT, or at least a journey, depending on how and when you're going to be moving different services, or if, to the cloud, and make sure that we're accelerating business growth with faster integration, reduced time to productivity. And then finally, of course, security across both of these. And when we talk about security, we want to make sure we're talking about it from the point of, one, reducing that likelihood of a breach throughout the complex supply chain. Second, that this is integrated with other security services that you're going to be using, so that this is integrated across your stack in that modern zero trust approach. And then finally, that approach to security is going to help support and streamline compliance requirements. So over the course of the rest of this presentation, we'll dig into each of these components and talk a little bit more specifically about how you can manage each. So to begin with, we'll dig into the people side. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, but when we're talking about people, we recognize that I think one of the biggest challenges is this complexity for the global supply chain. Restarting for a moment here. So we recognize that one of the challenges, and we've talked a little bit about this before already, is that the complexity of the people that are involved in the supply chain. You mentioned before there are more than 12 million manufacturing workers in the United States, accounting for almost 10% of the U.S. workforce. That workforce makes up not only a significant portion of the U.S. population, but also includes that variety of roles, and each one of these people has a unique set of IT needs. Technology access needs to be extended to all of these different types of people, which all require different level of access, different maybe technologies that they're using to get access to those services. For example, someone who may work on site in one of the factory or distributor locations may not be allowed to bring smartphones into a facility or have limited connectivity inside of that facility, which may limit access or multi-factor authentication options. Additionally, hourly workers present different problems than salaried workers. If an hourly worker accesses a system and does work, he needs to get paid. So how do we start to manage all of that complexity? And I guess when we take a step back too, and you start to look at all of these disparate identity stores that we're going to need to connect access into, that can be a mixture of where those users are coming in from. They could be coming in from existing on-premises user stores. They could be coming in from partner organizations. And there's this need to connect, especially as more and more businesses are turning to each other to share resources and to grow. So to foster that ecosystem, we need to be able to bridge all of this technology together into one unified system. So how do we actually do that? We see 4 common methods for integrating identities across that broad ecosystem. So the first one that we see, and you can see on the left-hand side, we have a levels of effort, so the effort that's going to be required for IT to manage. The first one is manually. So manually adding partner users and their passwords into enterprise apps and internal systems is currently the oldest method in use. But just because it's common and been around for some time doesn't mean it's the best. The manual nature of this not only means that administrators have to have knowledge of users' credentials, but there's no guarantees that those credentials haven't been intentionally or unintentionally exposed. Ultimately, I think the biggest crux and the biggest challenge of this is the lack of scalability. So the administrative overhead of maintaining all of those different identities across all of those different stores is not going to be sustainable for your business. So the second one that we see is the self-service model. So this allows individuals across in your B2B and B2C relationships to self-register their own user accounts into your systems. A benefit here is that the individual users are the only ones to see their own PII, and it's a significant step in security over that manual ID administration. Also, most self-service methods include built-in password recovery flows, so there's going to be less administrative intervention and overhead than the previous manual ID administration. That said, we tend to see this as a better method for B2C than B2B scenarios, as it puts more of the burden onto your partners, as each of those users has to go through and create and then manage their own credentials. So it's effectively shifting that burden from you into your partner organizations. And again, we do have that security risk, as when the partner relationship ends or if someone leaves your partner firm, you have to be the one to make sure to eliminate those accounts. So that again, the scalability piece is going to be tough to manage, as that deprovisioning piece is going to be a largely manual process. So then we get into something like a social authentication, so a Google or Microsoft ID. So this is sometimes referred to as the BYO Bring Your Own Identity. It allows users to sign in with existing Google and Microsoft credentials or whatever your preferred vendor is. We've seen this grow in popularity quite a bit because of its ease of use. But I think one of the challenges we see here is that the fact is not everyone has one of these identities. But it can be a good option when combined with ID federation. So that's one out there. The last one that we hear from organizations is this federated IDs. So federation provides the most frictionless experience for users and admins. Under ID federation, you and your partner or your business customer are mutually agreeing to allow their users to use their own identities to access your authorized apps or services. And it does so by pairing your different identity systems through a metadata exchange, which simplifies integration in the way that provides frictionless experiences. So we're going to dig in a little bit more on this, but ultimately, and how Okta can help you do this. But ultimately what Okta is allowing you to do is to integrate with a wide range of technologies and allow partners to use their existing user stores and bring their users into Okta. So once in Okta, those resources can be shared to downstream applications and then take full advantage of Okta's policy engine and group assignments to limit access and to scope that access to the appropriate user. So for example, if our partner contract code, that first one, we only want to make sure that they have access to a limited set of applications, we can use Okta's central policy engine and group assignments to limit that access to just those applications. Versus maybe my second partner, I want to limit to a different set of applications because they're our shipping partner. So digging in a little bit more on there. So for example, we talked about that social authentication. So Okta currently has a social authentication feature that allows organizations the ability to give their customers the option to authenticate into Okta using one of the 4 largest social auth providers. So this being LinkedIn, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. The generic OIDC provider gives them the ability to provide this same functionality to any OIDC compliance system. We mentioned second, which is this idea of ID federation. So inbound federation allows Okta to become a service provider in that other identity providers can bring their users into Okta and grant them access to applications. So inbound federation supports SAML 2.0, thus supports any identity provider that supports SAML 2.0, be it an on-prem system, another cloud identity provider, or even another Okta tenant. And then lastly, as one other example, Okta has directory integrations that allow users from legacy directories such as an Active Directory or LDAP to be imported into Okta via a SAML on-prem agent that uses outbound HTTPS. So once imported into Okta, users can be assigned access to those applications, just as we discussed before. So all that said, benefits to using Okta for supply chain identity integration, we see them falling into 4 core buckets. So one is that inbound federation. So this allows your Okta tenant to act as the service provider, granting external identities access to your Okta protected app or website. And while this is a role reversal of traditional SSO solutions, it gives your consumption endpoints for authentication, enables just-in-time user creation, and makes it easy to terminate connections with other enterprise identities. Okta also allows you to implement inbound federation with either SAML 2.0 or OpenID Connect, which I didn't show here earlier, but is an option for you. Second, you can use those pre-built identity providers. So I mentioned before, in addition to facilitating the creation of custom identity providers, you can use pre-built identity providers that are already common, making it easy to integrate something like a Google or a Microsoft out of the box. And then third, we have those directory integrations. So we want to make sure that if you have made significant investments into on-prem identity solutions, that you don't have to abandon those investments or integrations to go over to the cloud. So by tying into either AD or LDAP on-prem, Okta provides directory integrations that enables organizations to take advantage of legacy solutions in that hybrid deployment model. And then lastly, we have this hybrid and secure user models. So using Okta and the Okta API's automated tenant creation functionality, software and service providers can use Okta as their identity layer and give their customers access to their own Okta tenant while retaining that control. So we have a number of organizations at Okta that are using us for this today. One example is Flex. Okta provides Flex a unified identity platform that secures its supply chain for its partner and business customers while connecting its employees with the apps they need. So you can see just a few stats on here. We have a deep dive if you'd like to look more into the Flex use case on our website as well. So second, we wanted to dig in, that's on the people side, so really digging into the idea of ID federation and how we can scope that access to the right people at the right time. But second, we also wanted to take a look at what they're getting access to, so the technology piece. So when we start to take a look at technology adoption management, we want to make sure that we're enabling authorization and access to all applications, and there are three components to doing so. So the first is that the Okta Application Network, the Okta Integration Network, the OIN, is the largest and most reliable app network with over 6,000 pre-integrated apps for single sign-on and over 700 SAML integrations. That means that we support many applications out of the box for you today, and we make it really easy for you to integrate those applications, maybe custom applications that you are not already pre-integrated into Okta. So what that looks like, for those cases where an integration doesn't yet exist, Okta supports a wide range of integration to enable access through our SSO. So that might, again, happen because you have a custom homegrown app or you have a legacy on-prem app. We want to make sure that Okta enables you to connect all of those behind that unified secure portal. Lastly, Okta, a key aspect of how we do all of this is our flexible policy engine. So I mentioned this in the previous section that we want to make sure to limit access for the right people into the right time. But we also, this flexible policy engine also allows admins to be specific about how you're managing authorization to resources and enforcing the right level of security. So for example, if we're talking about contractors and the application is something like Office 365, and the user is off network and maybe they're coming from a web browser, then you can choose to deny access. You can also integrate with Okta's multi-factor authentication, which can use one of Okta's own MFA as a factor, or you can integrate other existing factors that you're using today to require step-up authentication based on the riskiness or the likelihood that that person is who they say they are. So an alternate example might be if my partner is coming in from what we would consider to be a typical context for that partner to sign in from, then based on Okta's risk-based authentication and all of the context, so again, examples are listed here, then we could require a step-up authentication or even potentially a frictionless experience if that person is signing in from what we would consider to be based on the machine learning in the background of their context, typical for that user, and thus a low risk attempt, then we could provide a passwordless experience. But we don't want to do all of this without losing access again to those on-premises applications. So again, we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar talking about how many manufacturing businesses are faced with that challenge of integrating with existing architecture. So how can we start to simplify some of that hybrid access and ensure that as we adopt or maybe shift certain applications to the cloud, that we're not losing the investment that we've already made today? So hybrid access, as we know, can be very complex. Just like taking a look at the screen, we see all of that on-premises resources at the bottom here. In the upper left, you see all those remote, maybe mobile employees, those partners and contractors who are not existing in our on-prem resource environment. And then, of course, the cloud applications that we want to provide access to as well. So we know that for organizations using WAM and SSO from previous generations, access management can be a challenge. These traditional solutions are outdated and they're not built to address those modern challenges. They're expensive to keep running due to infrastructure costs, which is, we know, critical for many businesses in this industry. They can be a security liability due to the difficulty to set up and keep systems current against the latest threats. Simple upgrades can take months to be implemented and most times require third-party engagement. Legacy systems also provide poor support to emerging security features such as IP trust, push notifications, and FIDO. And of course, they're deprecated. Vendors are starting to sunset their WAM solutions and they're cutting off investments here. So how can you start to manage all of these applications at once? Earlier this year, we announced the Okta Access Gateway, which is designed and built with backwards compatibility in mind. So with the Access Gateway, companies can start to replace those legacy WAM solutions with Okta's modern identity platform for applications on-prem without needing to change their source code. So it integrates with applications on-prem, those WAM apps, using header-based authentication. And we have a deep dive for those of you who are interested in learning more about our Access Gateway and how you can use Okta for header-based auth which we can follow up with as well. So all of this to say, what we want to make sure that we're doing here is providing the as frictionless experience as possible, both for your IT administrators and also for your end users, so that we have one place that they can go to get access to the applications that they need. So if you are a contractor and you need at one point in the supply chain and you need access to just this list of applications, you can easily through Okta integrate those identities into the backend for Okta, make sure that they have access just to those applications, and even apply strong layers of authentication on top of that to build in security. And again, we'll get more details on that in a moment. With Okta 2, we also have a customizable and consumer-grade experience. So that will look different depending on which device. We want to make sure that this is accessible no matter what device your end user is using in that clean, simple user interface. And then, of course, that we're making that's something that you can customize for your end users as well, so that your partners and potentially business customers that come to your site to log in to get access to those different applications know that they're interacting with your brand whenever they sign in. So another organization that is using Okta for some of these manufacturing challenges, and particularly the hybrid access challenges, is Hitachi. So you can imagine, with over 100 years of history, Hitachi has grown quite expansively. Today they have 900 business units, each with its own distinct IT environment, and a couple 100,000 employees to give access to. So in order to keep that innovative culture, they knew they needed to integrate new technologies and give access anywhere, which is why they turned to Okta to replace some of those legacy systems and consolidate its access experience for both employees and then also those suppliers, so they can streamline tech adoption cycles and start to automate those manual tasks. So one example of those manual tasks being provisioning and deprovisioning, which we're going to get to in just a moment. So I've led up to a lot of this, but the last piece that we want to talk to here is the security side. So how can we reduce likelihood of a breach throughout all of the complexity of this environment? So I think everyone on joining us today will be unsurprised to hear that integrating disparate identities can represent risk, right? And it's not just risk from a security breach, which you can see on the right. Those inconsistent policies and enforcement can increase a likelihood of a breach, but it's also a risk in terms of the maintenance and for your end users. So that second stat here in the middle here, the maintenance challenge that we talked about with all of those disparate users, can mean many hours of trying to maintain and manage all of that complexity across systems and users. And we've also seen that many organizations, customers will abandon the sign-on when faced with friction. And when you are a business that needs to optimize efficiency as quickly as possible, that's just unacceptable. So how do we start to manage that? And double-clicking a little bit more on the security aspect, over 80% of breaches today are caused by compromised credentials, right? So common attacks that we see that are credential oriented can be something like phishing, can be social engineering, and because the primary and easiest way external threat actors are targeting organizations is through credentials, we need to make sure that we're managing that risk. And the second risk in here too is through those insider threats, which is when an employee or someone unauthorized to access certain applications or data misuses their privileges for malicious reasons. And although attackers and malicious insiders may not have all credentials, once they have one and get some access, they can use privileged escalation to move laterally through an organization, repeating that phishing and social engineering tactics if necessary to gain access to what they're after. That means once attackers gain access, they can find their way into all of your critical apps. So When we talk about hardening access, it can't be to only critical applications. It has to be all applications. So how do we take that on? And again, I want to make sure that when we talk about this, that we're talking about taking it on with simple experiences, right? So we have to juggle all of that security without losing the usability for our end users. So we want to make sure that that's a low touch, that we offer a variety of factors, so that our users aren't that we're not locking things down so much that people can't get work done. So how do we do that? How do we balance security with usability? We can use a comprehensive set of factors for different use cases. This allows us to have customization. It can ensure compliance, which is really important. And then with policies, we can have further flexibility and ease of use. So the lowest generally lower set of assurance that we would see would be something like a password or a security question. There are stronger versions, so something like SMS or a software OTP one-time push can be a stronger security factor. Certainly physical tokens or Okta Verify, which is an application that we can use, or something like a hard token or biometrics will be the strongest. And so by offering this variety of factors, you can, with Okta, pick and choose, depending on the potential riskiness of an authentication, what factor experience I'm going to provide to my end users. That could be a combination of multiple ones of these, so it could be maybe typically signing in with a password and then requiring something like an Okta Verify push or a physical token as a second factor in order to prove they are who they say they are. Or if we want to replace maybe the primary factor with something like biometrics, we can use that as the primary factor or even only factor if we have a low risk authentication attempt. All of this to say, though, that your users aren't static, right? And so your security shouldn't be. And so I mentioned a few examples of maybe I want to provide a password and then Okta Verify, or just provide a hard token as my primary factor. And so based on where the user is, the context around that user. So maybe I know that this user is in the finance department and they are traveling on the road for some reason. Because that finance user isn't typically signing in from, maybe they're at a family member's house and signing in from a non-typical device. What do I know about the context of that user before I give access? So Okta provides a number of contextual pieces that helps to make intelligent access decisions based on all of these different attributes. So if the user is behaving ways in which we as an organization have defined as insecure, then we can require a step-up authentication or just deny access. And again, based on all of these different things, so understanding, are they using a password that has been compromised previously? Something like haveibeenpwned.com is a really easy public resource to show your end users if they're maybe not making the best choices when it comes to something like passwords. But then we get into even deeper, that maybe something like your end user isn't going to be as aware of every day, but that your MFA solution needs to look at in order to dynamically apply or modify policies to fit different situations. And of course, all of this, as I mentioned, needs to fit in with your existing with your existing security stack, or at least with where your security stack is evolving. So when we take a look at MFA, it plays an authentication. It plays a pivotal role in the organization in connecting applications and providing visibility. So we'll take a look at it in these stages. So first role for MFA, along with other identity management tools, is to provide that secure authentication, which we've already discussed. Next is enabling your business to connect to all of the applications that they need. So that's the single sign-on and lifecycle management, which we'll actually touch on in just a moment. And here's all of those different applications that they're going to need to connect into. But it also needs to, an ideal MFA solution should be extending into other parts of the organization. So with identity as that modern perimeter, MFA and authentication plays a pivotal role in providing visibility across all risk areas from network to mobile. So that allows security teams to correlate and derive meaningful data between authentication data and other solutions like AV, firewalls, threat detection systems, etc. So this is when you can truly obtain that end-to-end visibility into an attack, from who was behind it or whose credentials were initially compromised, how the attack progressed through the network, confirmation of any exfiltrated data, and finally take action through responses like denying user access to certain applications and services. So all of this then allows security teams to correlate and derive meaningful data between authentication data and those other security solutions. And this is really when you can start to obtain that end-to-end visibility into an attack, from who was behind it, or whose credentials were at least initially compromised, how the attack progressed, and so on and so forth. And I've mentioned this a few times, but we talked about that automated piece, and I left this in the security section because I think many organizations look at automating onboarding and offboarding as a productivity tool, and it certainly is. And when we go and you think about, so we talked about that broad complexity of all of those users, then we talked about the broad complexity of all of the resources that they're going to need to access. Manually providing access into any one of those services is going to be extremely time consuming and challenging, and it also leaves the door open for lots of manual processes can have errors or are more likely to. But when you also think about this provisioning and deprovisioning challenge, particularly the deprovisioning piece is the one that you think about from a security perspective. So if someone is to, for example, leave an organization, we need to make sure that their access has been cut off, so we aren't left with maybe orphan accounts or latent access when they aren't supposed to. So with Okta uses a lifecycle management tool to help manage lifecycles with any business process for all of these different users. So you can use source attributes from any combination of those systems that we talked about before. So that could be one of those directory services, it could be a self-service registration, it could even be a CRM or an HR system, or at social login. But based on those combination of source attributes, you can then manage those resources. So that could be birthright access. So if I'm a partner and I say any partner in this category or this specific partner will get access to this specific set of applications. Or you can put in options for self-service request. So maybe it's an application that we're not going to automatically provision, but if that partner or if that supplier decides says, hey, this would help me be more productive, you can make that an option for self-service and approved requests. Then you're going to want to renew access, and that through that audit, again, that can be something to make sure that constantly that we're confirming, are the right users still accessing the right level of resources? And through the automated provisioning and deprovisioning and the processes that are set up, you can use that as a part of your audit to show, hey, this is how we are setting up access permissions. So these groups have access to these applications, and you can constantly audit to make sure that that's consistently true. Then when we renew access, so if there is a change in maybe one of those directory states, like a user has left, or maybe a user has changed roles within your organization, they've gone from maybe working at one location to another, and we need to change their roles, that we can update their permissions based on those states. And then finally, again, when they're offboarded, we want to make sure that we suspend and potentially fully offboard. So that could look like, depending on the contract end. So if it's a contractor and we know that they're set for a 3-month contract, that we automate that user being deprovisioned or suspended at the end of the contract. You can also set automated policies that say if a user is inactive for a certain set of time, that we automatically suspend their account after maybe 30 days of inactivity. That way it gives us a chance to review and say, okay, based on maybe this month, which are the users that have been inactive for 30 days, and confirm, does this user still need access, or continue to suspend or deactivate that user. So this is just kind of a deeper look at what that can look like from a provisioning workflow perspective. So again, I have the lifecycle engine on the left, so I can see if it's a new hire or we have That end date, we see then that feeds into the policies for access decisions, and then where that workflow goes. So if the request for automation, so we say, hey, I need access to a specific application, that app owner can either approve or deny that request. It will confirm against the entitlements that you have set within your organization, and then provision or deprovision that application. And this is all built right in. Finally, we want to touch briefly on the compliance piece again. So using Okta and the reports for this for some simple access governance. So this is what it would look like within Okta. It easily enables you to run a report to find all access information for a specific user or all users assigned to a specific application. So you can add an app attribute that is relevant to your report, so like a department or role, and then look into all the recent unassignments between two dates between a certain application, and then of course export all of these reports for further analysis or sharing. And why you'd want to do this, of course, is you need to know who is assigned to which application and then how they got access to it. These internal and external audits can require reporting on random user access or access a group of users have had to a specific application. So that was a very quick and high-level version of how you can use an identity system to secure and optimize your supply chain IT. So again, we talked a bit about the user complexity and how you can use ID federation to consolidate and secure access across that extended ecosystem of workers, contractors, and partners, and then reduce manual tasks, such as, which we just touched on, the onboarding and offboarding. We also touched on the technology piece. So again, we saw with manufacturing businesses in particular that they are faced with challenges about integrating existing architecture and existing infrastructure with many of those new cloud services. So we touched on how can you ease technology adoption and management, both for IT and also for the end user, regardless of, again, if they're internal or external user. And then finally touched on the security aspect, so how you can use something like multi-factor authentication and Okta's contextual risk-based engine to provide stronger authentication experiences, and then integrate across your security infrastructure and provide that compliance and audit reporting. So we have resources, a lot of deep dive resources on each of these topics, so we'd be happy to go through and send them to you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much.